But wait, where's our season 10 news?
I have no idea, man. Like, we got that tweet being like soon, and then nothing since. Is that right? I haven't seen anything anyway on the subreddit.
They have a really broken idea of what constitutes soon.
So no news.
Damn, we could have broken that news and then waited in excess of a week to publish.
Oh dear. Should we dive into some follow-up?
We really should, yes. What have you got?
There's not a lot of follow-up this week. I did learn that the Battlebots subreddit has a list of all the Ask Me Anythings that the builders have done on that subreddit. I think last time I commented that it's really hard to find stuff on Reddit after a few days. You know, once it's gone, it's gone. Reddit is very much a what's happening right now type platform. But some subreddits, like most subreddits, can have a wiki if they want, and some of them use it, and they use it quite effectively. The Battlebots.
Battlebots?
The Battlebots subreddit uses it and has a list of all the Ask Me Anythings that have happened on their subreddit, which is really good for finding out information about robots that are competed in Battlebots. I really enjoyed reading Ray's Ask Me Anything about Tombstone.
How many hours of the last week have you spent on AMAs?
Not as many as I'd like.
I see. I was expecting your response to be something along the lines of too many. Apparently you have actual self-control.
I've got lots of other things to do, like editing this.
And then waiting for me to do show notes that for some reason take longer than editing a whole podcast. Have you seen on Facebook the new robot project involving Dave Laurie?
I have. I was sort of vaguely aware that he's working on something. I've not seen it, though. Do you want to send me a link? Or shall I
In
find
today's edition of Sam and Ryan Google Robots, take a look at Two-Headed Death Flamingo.
I mean, the name alone.
The name alone is glorious, yeah?
That is a good name. Am I on the right thing?
If it looks ridiculous, then yes.
Combat Robot. At Flaming Robot. Well, there's a picture of Dave Laurie wearing a... Yeah, I got that right. Dave Laurie wearing a flamingo hat.
Always a good start. I'm going to take a look myself. I haven't actually been on this page in a little while.
This has got, like, really wide arm things and two axes.
I'd say they're more grabbers
than
than
not
axes.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah,
they're
they're more grabber things, aren't they? And then the things on the side, they're up and down, not closing.
I believe they just go down, as in they start off raised on electromagnets and are then just dropped to the floor to start the fight.
Are they like raised up to fit within some kind of size constraints and then it just unfolds?
It may be for that reason. It may also just be for the theatre of it.
Does it unfold and lock out so that it can't fit in the pit anymore?
That wouldn't be bad, you know.
What are the rules? So like there's obviously a maximum size or there must be a maximum size of robots. Is that like the maximum size it could possibly be, or the maximum size when it starts? Could you do an unfolding robot?
I don't know the rules for heavyweights, but the rules for ant weights do allow that. So with an ant weight, your whole robot has to fit within a 4-inch cube. And as long as it starts the fight within that cube, it can unfold and do a kind of Transformers thing or whatever, and that's fine. So maybe it's the same for heavyweights. I feel like it's a question that no one ever bothered to ask until now.
I think it's worth asking.
Well, if anyone was going to ask, it was going to be Dave Laurie involved, wasn't it?
That is a robot. The CAD looks interesting.
The CAD looks pink.
It does look pink.
I would describe it predominantly as pink.
I am very much in favour of pink robots.
What pink robots have we had? I can only think of Glitter Bomb.
Not enough pink robots. That's how many. That's what pink robots we've had. Not enough.
Hashtag more pink robots.
Hashtag pink Sergeant Bash.
Oh god. Pink Killer-Lot could also work.
Oh dear.
On to more sensible news.
Yep.
Something that we discussed last week and weren't quite sure about was the Bronco 2 bots controversy. I say controversy. I don't think anyone's complained about it. I want it to be a controversy.
You just like controversy.
It's way easier to talk about. When we agree on stuff, it's boring. If you look in the show notes from last week, I found picture confirmation that Bronco took 2 fully constructed robots to Battlebots.
They did.
How do you feel about that?
I'm still okay with it, to be honest. It doesn't actually... Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know. I think I'm okay with it. It's sort of interesting that it really widens that gap between the teams with lots of money and the teams without lots of money.
See, that's the thing. For me, it is kind of... It's flashing the cash in a way, isn't it? Although, is that any worse than teams like, you know, for example, Pulsar, Concussion to a degree, who go in and burn out motors every match?
Yeah, that's flashing cash. That's burning money. Whoa!
Hey, you beat me to it. How dare you? Yeah, it was one of those things where when we discussed it as a maybe, I wasn't really okay with the idea of it. But when I saw that it had happened, I became more okay with it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I still don't know how I feel about it in a way, but if teams are allowed to turn their robot from a horizontal spinner to a vertical spinner to a lifter to an axe, this doesn't seem as bad to me. This is more acceptable to me.
I think it's, I'm all right with it. I think the most important thing is that all the other teams don't mind. I think if everyone else has a problem with it, like who's competing, then there's a problem. And if no one who's competing minds, then there's probably not a problem.
That is a very good point, actually. I haven't seen how teams feel about it. It certainly didn't become a big controversy. So presumably they're okay with it.
Well, they're okay enough not to kick up a fuss.
But I do wonder if the response to it would be different if a less established team came in and did something like that. The Bronco team have been competing for years. They've got friends in the pits, as it were. I do wonder what would happen if someone kind of did a rapid almost, came in as a new team, throwing money at the problem. I wonder if that would get looked at slightly differently and if people would be delighted when they eventually got beaten.
I think if they threw money at the problem and then were successful, unlike Rapid, then there may be a problem. But throwing money at the problem and then failing miserably would probably be quite funny.
This is something, and I'm sorry to bring, physical sports into this. This is something that happens in football all the time.
Oh.
People tend to be okay with old money, but when new money comes in, everyone wants to see it fail.
This is probably something that is pervasive across all of human culture, I would guess. I don't think it's just sports, physical or otherwise.
But all we're interested in is robot fighting, and 50% of us are interested in football.
Mohawk seems like the kind of robot that would be into football. What? There's a stereotype for you. How's that for a segue? Is that unfair to say that football fans have like Mohicans? Is that an unfair stereotype or a really dated stereotype?
I wanted to say that is an entirely unfair stereotype, but I'm fairly sure that on Saturday I was at a football match and an opposing fan had a Mohican. It's one of the only times I've ever seen it, but I now can't argue with you because of it. What I haven't ever seen is a fan with a mohawk that's also on fire.
This falls into the camp of rubbish razors again for me. It's got that iconic weapon that's not nearly as pretty as razors.
If this robot ever actually worked, then it would be one of the all-time greatest designs.
You say this about so many robots. If this robot worked, it would be great. It doesn't work.
I'm not saying it is one of the greatest designs, but the concept behind it is beautiful and brutal. To puncture an opponent and then shoot fire into their innards. How does that not appeal to you?
Does the fire come out of the end of the thing as well? I only ever seen it come out of like all the top, and it always seemed pointless to me. But yeah, like if you're injecting fire into their opponents, that wins them back some points.
Okay, that is literally what they're trying to do. They've actually based the design of the claw on a medical tool. So the idea is it's got the hard tip. So, if you imagine a normal sort of hypodermic needle, it's a hollow tube that's sharp.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not going to have the strength for what they're trying to do. So what they've created instead is a hard tip with a sort of aperture, for want of a better word, or a tube that comes out slightly further down it. So it would maybe need 5-6 centimetres of penetration, and then that tube would be inside. Obviously, with modern armours, I think we're very unlikely to see that work. But if it did, if that worked just once, that would be beautiful.
That would be good to see. That would be very cool to see. Unfortunately,
they did have a moment in their pre-qualifier where they got a good bite on someone, but it was only on a wheel, so it didn't really show off what that weapon could potentially do. And the rest of the design is also terrible.
Yes, it is unfortunate. I'm trying to think, because I just watched those pre-qualifiers, and there was definitely,
Are you going to struggle with saying the name?
No. I was going to say, was it Blacksmith that like held fire like on the inside of someone maybe? Because there was definitely one point where there was fire being...
Yes, so that was Blacksmith against Gemini, where they kind of got the hammer down on top of something that I think, to be fair, was already immobile, kind of pinned them down and torched them in what was kind of a slightly poor complete control style moment.
Yes, not nearly as effective.
Mohawk got a good grip on the wheels of Lycan and gave them a good flaming, but obviously that's not quite the soft innards that they're going for.
No.
It's just making smelly rubber at that point.
Well, yeah. I mean, as ever, these robots are more interesting when you tell me a little bit more about them. Like just from looking at them and just sort of seeing what little there is on the broadcast, there's not a lot to make me like this robot. But yeah, like injecting fire into someone else, that's pretty cool.
To be fair, this is a robot that I'd forgotten about, to the point that when we spoke about flames in the last episode, I forgot to bring it up.
Yeah.
It is, although it's visually spectacular, because it didn't perform well, it is really forgettable. And the issues it had are, A, it's a non-meta weapon, and B, the rest of the build isn't that effective. So it's not particularly mobile, the wedge isn't particularly effective either, and those two things, especially in Battlebots, you cannot get away with.
No. So other than their qualifier, they had one fight against Bite Force, which was not shown in full. So like this is part of why they're so forgettable. Is they had the pre-qualifier that wasn't aired on at least on the version of BattleBots that I found. It wasn't aired. I've only been able to see like a cut down version on YouTube, and then their actual aired fight against Bite Force was again not shown in full. And they lost it.
Which is a shame, because you think they're the kind of robot that is visually striking enough that BattleBots would want to show it off. But I suppose it's the kind of thing that makes for a good trailer, but its fights weren't actually very good.
Yeah, there's also a couple of other robots that have this kind of over-claw design thing, so which were, I don't know about better, but you know, they've got other robots that have that kind of silhouette that they can use.
Well, there's Photon Storm.
Yeah, and if that's more
which
effective...
is a more boring robot in a way, because it doesn't have the shoot fire inside them thing going on. It does have stupid wings just for visuals, but, you know, that's a gimmick, and we don't like gimmicks.
You don't like gimmicks?
Do you actually, yeah, you're probably right. I think you have been more pro-gimmick than I have.
Depends on the gimmick.
It's almost like it depends on the situation or something. Yeah. It's almost like we make a judgment call. Bite Force, though. I'm annoyed about Bite Force. Bite Force should not be called Bite Force. We went through this last time. Where is the biting? Show me the biting on this robot.
You might describe like the its spinning wheel thing as getting a bite on a robot and then throwing it. That's about.
And you'd be wrong. No, this really falls foul of my personal rules on keeping a robot's name. It's gone from a tracked control bot to a vertical spinner. The only thing that's left is a vague body shape and a colour scheme. I really do not think they should have kept the name.
I agree. Oh man, it does look... I mean, well, I do agree, but they're not completely different looking, I have to say. If you saw them both independently, you would say they were designed by the same group of people.
The thing
they have a lineage. I think, yeah.
Oh, God.
They do!
Overhaul, the new version of Overhaul, looks more like old Bite Force than new Bite Force does.
I'm not sure about that, because like I'm just looking at the old one, and like if you just take the tracks off but leave like the wheels inside the tracks, and then just replace, because it's almost like the mounting hardware for the claw thing has been used for mounting the spinner on it as well. I think there's more similarity there than you've given them credit for, I think. But I do agree, it shouldn't be called Bite Force anymore. It is a different robot. To
be fair to them, this was the original design that they applied with for the previous series. The main designer, builder guy, Paul Ventimiglia, he's always built spinners. Spinners are kind of his thing. They made an application for the previous series. They were turned down because there were already a lot of spinners. Fair enough. So they went for the control bot instead. Obviously, as reigning champions, they could have built basically anything and still got in, because you can't keep the reigning champions out.
Yeah.
So by fluking their way to the title last time, yeah, I said it, they flukes it, they've basically had the chance to build the robot they wanted to build, and it's been significantly less effective.
Poor guys.
As vertical spinners go, where would you rate this on the vertical spinner scale of BattleBots?
Well, I think it's safe to say that it's not a standard drum spinner, or even a standard vertical spinner. It's sort of like, because it's a much longer body than these vertical spinners often use. It's a robot. It's got a spinner. I think it's hard to tell just because of the angle that the pictures I'm looking at are. But I feel like the disc for or the bow tie that they're spinning around very fast could be lower down possibly, but maybe not. It's hard to tell.
I do wonder if the longer body shape is better or worse for gyro dancing. Because it seems like they don't gyro dance very much in battle, but they can kind of do it as a celebration. Because normally you've got the weapon on your sort of, especially the vertical spinners like your Brutuses, your Witch Doctors, your Aftershocks, you've got the weapon vaguely sort of on the point of rotation when the robot turns.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, it's forward of the point of rotation. There's probably a better word than point of rotation. I just haven't got it in my brain right now.
Yeah, like the centre on the like forward back axis. Yeah, it is further forwards. That will obviously change where the forces are applied, and it will make a difference. I can tell you that. I can't predict whether that makes it better or worse, but it would make a difference.
I'm also wondering if it increases the stresses on the weapon axle itself.
I doubt it.
Because you were saying last episode about Chromefly that you thought the way they've mounted their weapon increases the stresses on the weapon mounting. And I was thinking about that, and surely that must be even worse for vertical spinners. There must be a lot of stress going through that weapon mounting when they turn. Yeah,
a huge amount. That must be such a problem to deal with. I can't imagine that the position, like forwards or backwards of the robot, makes a difference. I think it will just be based purely on how fast that they're turning, I guess. I'm trying to think how to articulate this. I don't think it would make a difference to the stress on there that they've got it further forwards, like forwards of their centre of mass. Whereas someone like Aftershock probably has their spinner pretty much on their centre of, on or above their centre of mass, possibly slightly forward. Whereas these guys have it quite far forward to their centre of mass, I would guess. And I can't imagine that makes a huge difference when they're turning in terms of the stresses on the axis there, on the axle. But it would make a difference to how obvious the gyro dancing is.
I just realised how out of my depth I am on this conversation that I started. It's not a good feeling. And the worst thing is, in our next episode, I've basically set myself the challenge of explaining gyroscopic precession. I'm not prepared for that at all.
Oh, God.
I'm not clever enough for this podcast. I just have a stupid memory for Robot Wars. That's easier. What I can do is provide statistics.
Okay, then.
Would we like some statistics?
Go for it.
So their weapon is made of S7 tool steel, spinning at around 3,000 RPM. They've got a mix of aluminium alloys, AR steel and mild steel as their armour. Modular armour choices, including a set-up anti-crusher, which we saw against Mohawk. Also quite a few different wedge options. The little wedgelets they tried to put on in the first fight just fell off. Just you see at some point in the fight, if you watch the whole thing, they just go flying for no reason. So they were super effective.
Super well mounted there.
I've redeemed myself.
You have. Do you want to take us through Bite Force versus Chomp?
This is. I don't know if I want to do it yet. That's the thing. I kind of want to save it for when I'm waxing lyrical about Chomp. Suffice to say, it is the greatest precision hit in the history of robot combat. Let's leave it at that for now. Is that acceptable to you?
That is acceptable to me. Shall we move on to Ultimo Destructo?
Do we have to? Do we have to?
We do, unfortunately.
Oh, so you know how last episode we had what is without a doubt the best Swiss Army bot in the history of Battlebots? This week we've got Ultimo Destructo instead. It's just why? Why are you at this stage of the competition when so many good bots went out in pre-qualifying?
I love the fully exposed chain and drive cog above on top of their robot that's driving their weapon.
You see, here's the thing. They had a lot of different setups. They had a horizontal bar spinner, a hammer, a flipper. They also had designs for a lot of different armour options. The one they didn't finish was the anti-spinner setup. That went really well. Completely exposed drive pods.
Yeah.
Just, it's bad. It's really bad.
Everything about this is just fully exposed.
And the worst thing is, it's just ugly. It's really ugly.
It's not a pretty robot, is it? I have to say, it's very boxy. It's very unrefined.
Form has definitely followed function on this robot, hasn't it?
Yes, but not in a good way. Not in a good way.
But the thing is, when you look at it, I think on the wiki there's a few images of this. I'll put them in the show notes if they do exist. It looks completely different in all its different setups. The shape of the robot with that flipper is completely different to the shape of it otherwise. It's basically a Lego robot.
I'm watching the fight of Ultimo Destructo versus Ringmaster.
You say fight. There wasn't really any fight.
I'm just watching Ringmaster just slowly take this robot apart. It does look very different with the flipper. I have to say, it looks better with the flipper on it than it does with the spinner on it.
I'm just going to quickly check out an image for myself of the spinner because I've forgotten exactly how bad it is.
It's horrendous. This fight is so boring.
Oh dear. Oh, what is this? What is happening here? That's... Oh... Is there an image of it with the hammer on? That's the question. See, the thing is, Ultimo Destructo in the past has, I believe, been a flipper robot. And it's always had that kind of curved top, wheels out to the side kind of aesthetic. So I don't mind it carrying on that lineage. But the bar thing is just, ugh.
It's horrendous. It's just so ugly. Well, this is a pretty dull fight, I have to say. They've both just sort of stopped. Neither are really moving. I'm just stop watching that.
Ringmaster weapon stops quite early on, but it's kind of already done enough damage at that point.
Yeah.
Ringmaster, however, is a fascinating robot that I'm delighted to be able to talk about.
Have they got... So just from watching this video, I spotted something that I don't think I spotted before. It looks like... Because they've got 3 sets of wheels, it looks like. I don't know if they go all the way... They must go all the way through the robot, obviously. But like there's... Have they got Omni wheels, is my question to you.
I see that you spotted the omnidirectional vector drive. These are not Omni wheels.
Okay.
These are 3 sets of wheels at 120 degree intervals around the circular body. Mixing of the speed between the drive of all 3 creates a sort of gradiated almost transition between movement in any direction. That's a really bad description. Basically, it can move in any direction. The one thing it can't do is spin. But given that it's a ring spinner, it kind of doesn't need to.
Of course, yeah, it can't rotate around its... That's fascinating.
It's an absolutely beautiful design. I'm sure the designers themselves can describe it better. I think they've got a video on their Facebook. Again, that'll make it in the show notes. They'll explain it far better than I did. But it's a fantastic idea. Completely unnecessary, I feel, but still excellent.
Oh, it's interesting because it means you don't ever need to... I think we talked about this before in our discussions of Omni wheels, but with this robot, you don't need to consider which direction is forwards. You can just presumably just have it. Oh, I wonder how they deal with if it gets rotated. If it's obviously when it hits something, its body is going to rotate, and then how do they know when they hit left on their controller? How do they know which direction it's going to go? I guess they've either got some markings, I guess, or maybe they just don't know.
There's no obvious sort of big "this is forwards" arrow on the bodywork. What I've often seen things like full body spinners do, or robots using multi-brain systems, is they'll have some kind of light that is timed with the spinning to show them which way is forwards. Maybe they were doing that and it didn't come across on camera, but I think they just either didn't deal with it or had some kind of onboard system that worked in relation to a known direction through some kind of presumably ridiculously complex system. But I feel like that would be a lot of work. Although this whole robot is so deliciously complex that I wouldn't put it past them.
Deliciously complex. So I've just learned all 3 sets of wheels have their own radio receiver.
Yes.
in Ringmaster.
So I wonder if that means
mad.
that the mixing is being done off-board instead of on-board. So you could literally have a computer or whatever sort of at the side of the battle box, outside the battle box, which interprets the command for movement, does the mixing there, and then sends separate radio signals to the motors, rather than some kind of on-board computing happening, which would take up weight and potentially get damaged. If so, that's brilliant.
I don't know how that works. I don't know. I think it's very interesting there's 3 receivers there, though. That's a bit mad. Presumably
with some level of redundancy as well.
Well, apparently not. So I when I was commenting that this fight looked quite boring because Ringmaster just sort of sat there. So on the Reddit, the person, presumably who built it, is saying that there are three receivers and one of them wasn't working. It wasn't functioning. So there was one set of wheels that just wasn't turning, which is why they couldn't really drive around very much. So there's not any redundancy, it would seem. Or if there is redundancy, it's not good enough.
And I suppose that is an issue with this style of drive as well. If you lose drive in a wheel out of 4 on a normal 4-wheel drive robot, you're still going to be able to move forwards and backwards and turn.
Yeah.
If this loses drive to one set of wheels, it's boned.
Yeah.
But it is just... The work that's gone into this robot is ridiculous and beautiful. I mean, ring spinners are hard enough, but they've decided to go with an asymmetric ring spinner. Everything has been milled from solid blocks of metal. The chassis is made of magnesium, because why not? The ring, I'm guessing, is some kind of steel. I don't think you'd do that out of magnesium. That seems a bit weird. The whole thing is just absolutely exceptional. And the fact that it didn't work very well has nothing to do with it.
Very cool technology in there, but ultimately...
What I also love is that when the weapon is going, it just sounds like a really expensive alarm clock. Just has this really weird ringing sound going on all the time.
Yeah, can you imagine being woken up to that?
That'd be very dangerous to turn off, wouldn't it? Just randomly in your bleary state, slapping out at the top of it, trying to turn it off.
It would certainly wake you up.
Oh, God. We've gone insane already.
Woo!
Let's talk about Disco Inferno. Disco Inferno is what you get if Hypnodisc and Series 5 Panic Attack have a baby.
That is the perfect description for this robot.
It's a really stupid robot that's been made really well.
I was like, when it was first being introduced, I was like, oh, what is this? This is going to be rubbish. And then I was amazed at how effective its flipping bit is. Like, it's very good with that.
It is, and again, for an electric lifter, that is extremely impressive.
Yeah.
The disc, I worry, is a bit underpowered and a bit underweight. I would almost argue that the lifter is the more effective weapon on it.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
But that isn't helped by the fact that in the fight against Chomp and in the Rumble it was in, the weapon has got broken both times. So the weapon design is really interesting. Sorry, the disc design is really interesting. Because it's an asymmetric disc and it's got a very big tooth. And the way they've balanced it is quite strange. Normally you'd balance it by having a big tooth on one side and then just kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? Sort of a slightly enlarged radius on the opposite side.
Yeah, just like
to balance it out.
A blunt kind of lump over there.
So if you look at the Aftershock logo, you'll kind of see that. Whereas if you look at our logo, that I didn't make very well, it's literally just a circle with a tooth on it. And Disco Inferno's is the same. And the way it's balanced is that instead of the shape balancing it, it's a difference in the thickness of the material across the disc. So there are large areas on the tooth side that are thinned out, but it's still at full thickness on the other side, which makes no functional difference. I just thought was a really cool way of doing it.
It's a very interesting approach. It's probably, I would guess that's an easier way to machine one of these, I would guess.
It's probably more complex to do it this way, because if you're doing it just by shape, most CAD programs will let you do that really easily, and then you just cut it out of a solid piece of metal.
I don't know. I mean, this guy's an aerospace mechanical engineer. I doubt it makes a huge amount of difference in terms of asymmetric versus just knowing the density of the thing across there and calculating how much to remove from one side. I think it's. Of
course, it appears to have backfired because in the Rumble they were in, their disc has got physically broken, probably because it was too thin. So maybe the old-fashioned way's the best.
Perhaps.
But again, you talk about milling. The whole thing has been done out of solid billets of aluminium. So the body is from a single piece, the lifter is from a single piece, and the disc is from a single piece. So it's a super strong design. Just maybe not the most efficient use of weight with the two weapon systems.
I still love having like robots with two weapons. I still wish more people did it, but obviously this is a big challenge with weight distribution between them. I think having an effective spinner means no other weapon. It means you've got to put everything you can into the mass that you're going to have spinning around at high speed. But I still love that there are two weapons on this.
And again, that redundancy has kind of proved useful in a way, with the spinner proving quite unreliable. But if the spinner's the main weapon, the only weapon, maybe it ends up being more reliable anyway.
Yeah.
But I suppose also quite a lot of this, and we say this in Robot Wars a lot as well, is part of it is getting accepted. Getting accepted is the first challenge. So your design does have to be unique and interesting, and they've definitely achieved that. They've then also worn silly outfits, which definitely gets your points as well, as proven by Mobius.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, the Mobius outfits weren't silly. They were awesome, and that's different.
They're also probably paid to wear them.
Yeah. The only sponsor they're shouting out is their costume sponsor. I forgot about that. Can we talk controversy for a second?
Yeah, sure, go on.
The Disco Inferno versus Chomp fight.
Yeah.
When you watched that, did you think that was a dodgy judge's decision?
If I did, I didn't write that down. I think even then I was rooting for Chomp, so I was probably quite so it was I think it's possibly the only split decision that I remember anyway, of a 2-1 given to Chomp there.
They have been quite rare throughout, actually, the split decisions, which is a sign of good judging in a way.
Well, I believe that this is the one where I think Adam Savage was the guest judge in this, and I think...
Yes, and it was him that ruled in favour of Disco Inferno.
Yeah.
But no, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of people, especially directly after it was broadcast, saying that they thought Disco Inferno should have won the fight. And I'm not seeing it at all. To me, they've lost one of their weapons. They've not got any big damaging hits in, whereas Chomp have got 4 or 5 really solid hits with their hammer. Granted, Disco Inferno have kind of controlled things with their lifting arm, but that's not doing damage. And if you can't score in the damage category, you're already a long way behind.
I think that's probably the key difference, I guess, in that the proper judges are looking at it in one way and everyone else is looking maybe in a slightly different way. Because you're right that Disco Inferno controls a lot of the fight, and part of this comes down to what we'll come on to with Chomp, that it spends a lot of its time... Chomp spends a lot of its time on its back as a result of its own weapon. And... so that combined with the surprisingly effective lifter of Disco Inferno is going to, give them an edge in terms of controlling the fight. But you're right, Chomp gets some really good hits in. And ultimately, Disco Inferno doesn't have its main weapon. It doesn't have the weapon that can do all the damage. So obviously, the Battlebots judges are going to rule against it, really.
That's the thing. I don't know if either weapon is counted as primary and then the other secondary.
That's true. I mean primary in terms of that's the one that can deal damage, not necessarily that's the one they've got marked as a primary weapon. I don't think that really matters too much.
It's also, in very simplistic terms, the one that's on the front. And to me, that makes it the primary one, because that's the direction you should expect to be facing.
That would make sense.
But there's one robot where we definitely can't argue about which weapon is primary. And that is Chomp.
Yeah, Chomp uses a flamethrower as its primary weapon.
And then a tiny little hammer that just knocks things about a bit.
Yeah.
What an utterly ridiculous machine. And I say that in the best way possible. I mean, I love Beta. I love hammers in general and axes in general. I'm biased towards them. But Chomp is another level.
It's a bit ridiculous, isn't it?
It's just... I love any robot that can't contain its own power. That's what I want to see. I want to see something so strong.
God, no. That would be ridiculous, man. Just just 10 chomps all flying around, not doing any damage to each other, just sort of somersaulting.
But that's the thing. It is doing damage to other people.
It is, yes.
And they've set the hammer up in such a way that it doesn't damage itself if it misses. It just goes over instead. That's good design.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I like the actual arms that it's on. So it's got these 2 arms that obviously meet in front of it to the axe head. And they look really flimsy because they're just like thin sheets of metal. I don't know which metal, but they're fairly thin sheets of the stuff with holes down. And you think, well, that's got to be really flimsy. But it's obviously designed in such a way that it's got all its strength to stop it from bending in the direction it would bend when it hits something. But it's still really flexible, like left and right, like forwards and backwards, no movement, left and right, all over the place. It's quite a funny thing to see when it fires and misses or gets flipped or something. You can see the axe wobbling all over the place, but it's still got all the strength it needs in the direction that it needs to deliver some huge blows.
2 things.
Yeah.
Number 1, that is a Hardox weapon arm. That is some seriously strong stuff.
It still looks flimsy.
And 2, it does actually bend in the supposedly strong axis when the weapon fires. If you go onto their Tumblr, which I'm sure you've been onto before, there's a slow motion of the hammer firing that clearly shows how the hammerhead almost stays still for a fraction of a second. It's alwaysbechomping.tumblr.com. For the normal people out there, this will be in the show notes because it's a great little gif.
Oh my goodness me, that bends.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It's kind of like watching, and this is going to be my second sports reference of the night, it's like watching a slap shot in ice hockey.
Yeah.
Where they kind of press the stick against the ground to load it up with a bit of bend, which then releases when it hits the puck. It's kind of doing the same thing here.
I know what a slap shot is. I've watched ice hockey.
I'm explaining for the benefit of our dear listeners. I wasn't assuming that you didn't understand sports. That's the sort of thing a terrible person would do. Based on stereotyping and limited knowledge of you as a person.
Oh dear. I don't think it is bending in that direction, but I don't think it's I think it's bending because the arms are like rotating a little bit. Then as they snap back, it comes all straight again.
Oh yeah, it's bending presumably around the point where the arms bend in.
Yeah, it is.
But it still looks really cool, and it shows the immense power in that system. I was amazed, by the way, to learn that it's a pneumatic hammer. I assumed it was electric. I don't know why I assumed that. Probably because Beta is. And it does explain the ridiculous body shape as well.
A massive canister of gas on the top of the robot.
I don't know what I thought was there, but, you know.
It's just air, just to make it look cool.
Like I say, to be fair, also, the majority of the body isn't filled up with the canister. It's filled up with the massive pneumatic ram they've got in there.
It's ludicrous how big that thing is.
The bore on that thing is ridiculous. It must use so much gas as well.
I can only imagine. It is ludicrous.
One of the things I really love about them as well is they've got a really detailed and comprehensive sort of build log on their Facebook, and that really shows up the tiny details of this robot. So, for example, they've got a fantastic animation of how the sort of motion of the pneumatic ram is converted into the hammer action. They've got a lovely demonstration of the little return mechanism they've got as well for the hammer. It's a tiny little motorised thing that engages with the gear on the hammer that just inches it back. And the machining and work on that alone is almost as much design as would go into some heavyweights. The tiny components that are involved and the tiny little details, everything is just beautiful.
I agree. My favourite thing, which will probably surprise no one, is the semi-autonomous nature of this robot.
Yes. This is by far and away the most robot-y robot in Battlebots.
Yeah, this is the closest to a John Siracusa-approved robot that anyone we're ever going to get. And there's a name drop that I don't know who's going to get that, but I've done it.
That is niche. That is heavily niche. But that's okay, because this is a niche podcast.
Yeah, this is the closest thing to that kind of robot. So it's got sensors on the front of it. It knows when someone or something is in front of it. It can track objects. It can follow you or another robot around. It knows when you're in range of its axe. It knows when you're in the perfect spot to fire the axe, and then it can fire the axe. And they use it to great effect throughout their tournament in Battlebots.
Absolutely. There was a little bit of debate about whether this system was effective as they were maybe making out. The Bite Force fight proves that this works. I think it's their first hit manages to take out the weapon chain on Bite Force.
Yeah, one hit, one kill.
I would happily listen to someone say that is luck if it weren't for the fact that they make the exact same shot again in the fight. Just to show it wasn't luck, they hit that same spot again. And of course, the big issue with any kind of hammer or axe is what happens when you miss. If you can eliminate missing, you have got a terrifying robot on your hands. And that's why Chomp has gone so far. It's a super efficient machine. It's super well controlled because it's controlling itself. It's just... I talk about creativity and innovation a lot, and I probably talk about it quite stupidly at times. This is the epitome of useful innovation. This LiDAR thing is not a gimmick in any way. It has changed their performance. It has changed fights. It has won them fights.
How much of their... So I'm aware that in their fights they had the weapon on autonomous, but I think it's called auto-chomp, I think is what they called it. But it had the weapon automatically fire most of the time. Did they have it like automatically tracking opponents as well, or was that all them? Do you know?
I don't know how much of that was done automatically. I think if you watch the fights closely, you could probably tell when that's being used, I'd like to say. Because I imagine there would be small adjustments that are just too fine to have been done by a human. But I haven't watched for that, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So what little I know about building robots that can track subjects, it's not an easy thing to do. And it's also... I would be surprised if it was on a lot of the time. It might be like a shared autonomy type thing where the humans are saying point roughly in this direction, but it's got some leeway to specify within certain boundaries. I'd be surprised if it was operating at any point without any human input. I'd be surprised if it was doing that just from a technical point of view. I'd also be surprised if it was doing that from a rules point of view. I wonder where the line is in terms of the rules of the competition about autonomous or semi-autonomous robots.
From the interview that I've seen with the team, my understanding is that when it comes to the auto-tracking would do left and right. The driver would do forwards and backwards.
Okay.
So they could decide whether they wanted to back off or attack more. So if you're going on a charge against something, which to be honest, Chomp isn't going to be, it's not that kind of robot. But if you were, you could set up that charge yourself from a distance and then use the auto-tracking to fine-tune as you went, for example.
Yeah.
Just beautiful.
So I got to say, I've got a lot of... this is probably the most like software-dependent robot in the competition. I would guess. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would guess because I think they've got like an Arduino or something that's actually doing all the computation, which surprises me. It's doing an awful lot on a very low powered device, which is quite amazing, because given that you can buy very powerful like ARM based computers, basically very, very, very small credit card sized circuit boards or PCBs with a full ARM CPU, the kind of thing you'd find in your smartphone with all that power, you can get those things fairly cheaply. And then you've got a lot of processing power for doing this kind of thing. They're not using that. They're using an Arduino, which is much less powerful, much slower clock speeds, much more limited in what it can do. And they're using it to great effect. I was sort of stunned to learn that that's what they were using. I would have guessed something like a Raspberry Pi or an equivalent type thing. You can get ones with far more powerful CPUs than a Raspberry Pi. It's just cool. Autonomous software, not easy to do, and they've done it very effectively.
I aspire to one day be clever enough to make one of the parts of Chomp. If I get that far, I think I'm doing quite well.
I reckon you could do like the flappy arm bit that's used to self-right.
Maybe I could do like a wheel. I might be able to achieve a wheel. Oh man, Chomp, just thank you for being here. Thank you for existing.
I really look forward to seeing more autonomous and semi-autonomous robots in various robot combat competitions around the world.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up discussing this later on.
Yeah, I think Chomp have really sort of moved the state of the art forwards in that respect. I look forward to seeing what people's responses are.
As I said in a couple of other podcasts, especially when you talk about, things like Pulsar, someone has to break the ground. Someone has to make the mistakes. They don't even seem to have made the mistakes. They seem to have just nailed it.
I'm sure they've made mistakes. I'm sure they're looking at this robot going, oh man, there's so much more we could do.
Of course they are, but we're looking at it going, cool, semi-autonomous, flames, hammers. And that's good enough for us. Because we have medium standards.
You might have medium standards.
Oh, I think we both have overly high standards. As people with no actual technical knowledge, our standards are way too high.
I have a question for you.
I may or may not have an answer for you.
Does Death Roll meet your high standards?
Well, there are many facets to my answer to this question. Death Roll is at the art end of the spectrum rather than competitive end.
Yes.
So in that respect, I do let it off quite a lot. At the same time, it would have been nice if it could have taken a few more hits.
It came apart so easily.
I'm fairly sure there were parts of it that were held together with fishing line.
I think the tail is sort of articulated with string.
That's what it looked like, yeah. I must say, I know that they had more ambitious plans than the robot sort of ended up coming out. So they wanted the tail to articulate like a crocodile's would, so it could literally perform a death roll. That didn't happen. I would also argue that would have been really cool if they had a control bot, but with a disc on the front, that would have been pointless.
Yeah, if they had some kind of controlling mechanism and then actually death roll another robot, that would have been so cool. Why didn't they do that, man?
Pointless, but cool. The other thing they've done that's pointless but cool is their super complex spinner shape.
My favourite bit about this robot is how ridiculously asymmetric that disc is, and yet it's still balanced. It's amazing.
So it's supposed to vaguely resemble the outline of Australia. I've looked at it a few times. I can't even work out which way up it's meant to go for that.
Really? I think it's...
I haven't looked at Australia enough, clearly. I'm not exactly a Atlas kind of man.
I think it's close enough to the shape of Australia that once you know that, it's quite good. I wouldn't necessarily jump to...
I haven't tried hard.
Yeah, I wouldn't jump to Australia just looking at it without the context, but it is cool.
I think in the show notes it's definitely going to be a world map with Australia replaced by their disc. That's going to happen now, and I've committed to that, so I've got to do it.
Just make sure that world map contains New Zealand.
Well, why wouldn't it?
A lot of maps don't, and...
It's a world map. You can't take parts of the world out. Otherwise, it's not a world map anymore. Although I suppose every map has to decide what to put in and leave out. So maybe that's part of it.
There's a whole subreddit dedicated to maps without New Zealand on them.
I think people need to watch every single episode. Obviously, once they're done listening to Spinnerproof, they need to watch every single episode of Map Men on YouTube, which is one of the greatest series ever made.
If you say so.
I almost sang the theme tune there. That wouldn't have been good.
Dear me. But like, so there's this whole subreddit, and it's all like just pictures of world maps, not even like world like globes where the focus is on the America side of the world, but like full world maps that don't have New Zealand on them. So include New Zealand, or you will incur the wrath of maps without NZ.
I mean, if I'm going to offend Australians by misrepresenting their nation, shouldn't I equally offend Kiwis? Or should I just replace every country with something that's vaguely similarly shaped to it? Or is that committing to a large amount of work? On second thoughts, that's not happening. That would take time. What were we talking about again? I don't remember.
I think we're just finishing up with Death Roll.
Yeah, that joking about maps is about as much as I have to say about Death Roll. Lovely idea. Love the work that went into it. Also really pleased to see a team from somewhere other than North America or England in Battlebots.
Or Brazil. Yeah.
That's North, South America.
Look, when you say North America, what everyone hears is the United States of America. That's what you mean when you say North America.
That's literally what North America means.
Yes. Death Roll had one fight against Captain Shredderator, and in this fight, Captain Shredderator just slowly took Death Roll apart. Really, Death Roll has a surprising amount of the gyro dancing, and then it lost its tail, and then it lost its head, and then its motor caught fire, and then Captain Shredderator won.
If you're going to travel literally halfway across the road? Word of advice, kids, travel the whole way across the road.
If you only travel halfway, you're going to lose your head.
If you're going to travel halfway across the world to compete in a robot fighting tournament, you might as well go out in pieces and on fire. If you're going to lose hard, you know?
Yes, that's true.
Captain Shredderator, it's a full body spinner, and that's all I have to say.
Well, so this is using the lights to tell it which way is forwards and backwards, and I reckon the result of that is it's got quite weak armour on the top, which I would say makes it quite weak to a hammer, for example.
To be fair, it stood up in armour terms to the hammer.
It did surprisingly well, actually.
It didn't stand up in internal terms to the shock of the hammer.
No.
Although what I love about that fight, and we're of course talking about the Chomp fight, is that it was kind of like, you know, those touch lights where if you just tap it, it turns on or goes off. That's what Chomp was doing to it.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah. Gave it a big whack and it stopped, and then Chomp came and whacked it again for some reason, and it started right back up again.
It's one of those things where it's been involved in two good fights, but as a robot, I have very little to say about it. I would call it a standard full-body spinner, but it's not as good as a standard full-body spinner, because a standard full-body spinner has some kind of external angling. This is literally a very angry biscuit. That's all it is.
When we were talking about Brutus, I said what could be more American than a robot with guns on it, and I think Captain Shredderator is the robot that can be more American because it's very American.
Do you reckon if it caught fire, loads of viewers would get really upset that it's technically burning the flag?
I'm sure someone would be annoyed, yeah.
Is it like morally acceptable to beat Captain Shredderator?
Yes, it is, because Chomp did it, and I'm fine with that.
If Chomp does it, it's okay. I will say, in the Chomp fight, I don't think it was nearly aggressive enough. It did a lot of sitting near Chomp, waiting for Chomp to be hit by it, rather than just going at them and hitting them.
Yeah, I wonder if he was like a bit nervous about the auto-chomp thing, or if he just wasn't in complete control of the robot. I mean, off what I've learned reading about this a bit more is often the robots, like the people piloting the robot, for want of a better word, are like jamming buttons to try and make it do something, and it's just sort of sat there. So I wonder how much of it was just it sat there not responding to input versus him being coy about attacking Chomp.
Maybe. I mean, if it is tactics, it's terrible tactics.
I'm not saying it's tactics. I'm saying he's trying to attack, and the robot's not listening.
Yeah, before that, you said that maybe he was worried about auto-chomp, which I don't think is a valid idea, because you're basically saying, oh, I'm really worried about this hammerbot being able to hit me automatically, so what I'm going to do is stay still in the hope that they'll try and attack me manually and mess it up.
Look, Chomp is like a T-Rex. If you just stand still, it can't see you.
The LiDAR can only see movement. For the record, that's not how LiDAR works. It can see stationary things too. Or can it? Yeah, it can, can't it? Or can it?
Oh, God, not this again.
Yeah, no, I was going to go through that whole thing again. I bailed quite quickly.
Shall we take a break from robots for a moment and talk about the referees in Battlebots?
Oh, yes. This is conflicting for me.
Is it?
Because I love, in any sport, seeing the rules applied correctly. But I hate the American stereotype of a referee in a stripy top.
Oh, come on. Is that the reason you don't like it?
Look, I used to watch the incredible ITV game show Gladiators, and I loved everything about it except the referees wearing an American-style uniform. Because they should have been wearing black shirts like every other English referee, or, I don't know, like a cricket umpire's outfit if they had to. In England, our officials wear either black or white, and there's nothing in between. That's the British way. That's how we do things, and that's how it should stay. The Americans, they can't make a decision. They're going black and white. It's a cop-out. They might as well just wear grey. Don't like it.
It's the most ridiculous reason not to like the referees ever.
What were you expecting? Actual reasons?
So what the referees bring is a very clear signal for when a robot is being counted out and for when the match ends. So you've got a referee next to each competitor, I think, watching just the one robot, and then they will start very loudly and very obviously counting down from 10 when the robot stops moving.
I think they offer a lot more than that. They offer two-way communication between the team and an official. So if they've pinned someone, you're allowed 10 seconds stationary or 30 seconds moving to pin an opponent. When they're getting near the end of that 30 seconds, they are told they need to start releasing. Before that countdown starts, they are being told, you need to show me some movement. I imagine that a competitor could very easily quickly ask the referee a question about the rules. Or they could raise a complaint about something an opponent is doing during the match. We're not going to end up with a stupid Pulsar versus Ironside thing of a big appeal afterwards and points getting shared. Everything happens, this is... I talk about, sport. It's coming up a lot today. The way it works in sport, broadly speaking, is you sort it out when it happens. And that's what this offers. The result they come away with when they leave the box is the result. And that's how it should be. I don't want stupid behind-the-scenes drama. I don't want judges going back and looking at decisions again. I want a result that stands. So to me, it is absolutely perfect. I'd love to see it in Robot Wars, but I'm not sure how you'd do it in a non-American way.
I want to see it in Robot Wars complete with a black and white clothed referee. Or a ref bot with a black and white shirt. Oh yes.
Can Zara come in just dressed as an umpire? Oh, even better, can we, next to the arena, put him on a little high chair like they do in tennis?
Can we get the umpire from Dodgeball? Get him involved.
Oh, yes. That's an idea I can get behind.
Oh, dear.
Or can we get the old referee from Gladiators? Why not? I was going to try and do a Scottish accent there and I bailed very quickly.
I would say don't do that. It would be bad.
But no, referees actually communicating with competitors, great idea.
Yep.
Possibly the best idea in Battlebots. There's a lot of things about the way Battlebots works that I don't like. This I love.
Yeah, but consider this. Drones with flamethrowers.
To be fair, an idea that has been raised to do with Robot Wars is a ref drone. With like a spotlight or something for counting people out.
But instead of carding opponents, carding the people, it's got like a red flame and a yellow flame.
In terms of drone-based ideas, it's the least worst. And at this point, I will accept least worst.
Oh, you can project a clock like with laser projection onto the floor. Then it's got the multicolored flamethrowers. We should start our own robot combat competition. That's what we should do.
One day, we're going to have a 2-robot competition between our own amp rates.
And a ref drone.
Can we convert your little plane into ref drone? It like drop little orange or red bombs on people to card them.
I mean, that plane. I mean, so I don't know. Have I told you this? We test flew that recently. It does actually fly. Like, it works. I can't fly it very well.
I think I saw the video.
But you saw the video? Yeah, because it does. It works. It's amazing.
I then asked you a number of extremely intelligent questions about its design and build, and I was very proud of myself.
No, I clearly have a terrible memory for that. I'm sorry. I think a ref drone plane would be a bad thing. That's just this big delta wing circling above. It's massive. So the wing is like huge. It's possibly. It might even be like nearly a metre across, and like having that circling above an ant weight fight would be a bit ridiculous.
How much does it weigh?
Not a lot. I mean, so it can hover. Like, it could hover if it had a way of stabilising itself. It's got enough thrust in its single propeller to actually do a vertical takeoff.
Does it weigh under 150 grams?
I would be. Well, I don't know actually, because it's made of foam and it's just got one motor and a 3-cell battery.
If it does weigh under 150 grams, all you need to do is find a way of folding it into a 4-inch cube. And as long as it can unfold again, you've got an ant weight.
Are you allowed flying robots in ant weight?
In my ant weight competitions, you are.
Let's do some bombing runs against the opponent.
That would be beautiful. Although I'm sure that's a projectile weapon at that point, isn't it? So
how is that any more of a projectile weapon than just dropping a magnetic bar onto the floor?
Oh, don't remind me.
I'm just doing it from a bigger height.
Don't remind me of Black Ice. I just got over that.
I'm serious. So if you can drop things from robots on the floor, but you can't, are you allowed to drop them from drones?
You do realise that Chromefly had a bomber drone, right?
Did it actually?
Yeah, it was useless. That's why I forgot that it existed when we were actually talking about drones.
So they actually had a drone that would drop things. What did it drop?
Like a weird can with some little outriggers on it. It was very strange.
That's amazing.
You know what I want?
Oh, dear. What?
If we're talking about flames and drones,
Yeah.
I want a thermite dropping drone.
Oh. Somehow.
Why didn't we think about this when we were talking about drones last episode?
It just didn't come up.
Maybe it's because I'm more relaxed because I'm literally in bed right now.
Did the audience need to know that?
I'm like clothed and stuff. It's fine.
Thermite dropping drone. That would be very, very cool. Figuratively cool, obviously. Not literally.
Oh, yeah, moving on.
I really poisoned that conversation. Oh, dear.
For the record, the Skype call has not dropped out. Just want to make that very clear, that I am still here, and I am just this unimpressed.
Why don't you appreciate my puns?
I'm a big pun fan. I think that puns are an art form. I just don't consider you an artist.
I am a pun engineer.
Oh, no. You are the jellyfish of puns.
Oh, that was you this week. You did it this time.
Oh, yeah. One of these days we're going to go a whole episode. Anyway, on to Poison Arrow. Because if there's one thing we need to discuss, it's another standard drum spinner. But this one has a silly drone and an even sillier mini-bot. What have you got to say about Poison Arrow, Sam?
It's a standard drum spinner, and it looks too much like Hypershock.
Okay, let's finally address this. It looks nothing like Hypershock.
Well, it looked the same in my head.
Poison Arrow has a proper drum and a very low profile. Hypershock has 2 articulated lifting arm wedgie things. It's a much taller design, and the drum is far more pulsar than it is concussion. This is a concussion drum. Hypershock is a pulsar drum. And given that both of these robots came before both of those, I really should be saying it the other way round. Silly Anglo-centric podcast.
Oh man, they do. With the exception of one of them both having green accents, they are completely different, aren't they?
Yeah, that's the thing. I was sort of letting you go down that road last time.
They're basically identical in my head. That's really funny. They're just because they're both green.
Nothing alike.
They've merged into one robot.
To be fair, I also got them confused because for some reason in my head the names were similar. I was thinking like Poison Arrow and Septic Shock or something like that. But you know, it's kind of poison related.
Oh dear.
Bear in mind, I'm the kind of person that will read a whole book and not remember the characters' names at the end. So this is kind of hard for me.
You've got Poison Arrow and what would it be, like Radioactive Flash, maybe?
That didn't work.
Oh, come on. Arrow and Flash.
Work.
Come on.
The Flash. I don't like kids' films and kids' TV. I watch Rick and Morty instead. That's for grown-ups.
Whatever.
Do we actually have anything to say about Poison Arrow? In theory, it's a really interesting robot. 9,000 RPM drum, full brushless drive. It's doing lots of things right, but it's also in the same competition as Minotaur, and that's unfortunate for it.
No, I think it's probably its best moment was when it threw Son of Waiachi way up in the air.
Yes.
But
that's one of those moments that I could watch again and again and again and just never get bored.
Do you reckon we could talk about it again and again and again as well?
Really, when we were discussing drones earlier, we should have spoken about Son of Waiachi in that fight, because that's what it got turned into temporarily. Had it dropped some thermite, we'd have loved it.
Oh, helicopter robot. Right, full body spinner that generates lift.
Oh, no. Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
That would be glorious. I think up next we've got your favourite robot.
Tentamushi. Well, Mega Tento, technically.
Mega Tento.
You see, I remember watching Robot Wars, the sort of first, second, maybe even third series. The idea of the robots that were in Battlebots were these kind of mythical beasts that would be unbeatable. And there were two that were always spoken about. The first was the Master, and the second was Tentamushi. And it turns out they're both pretty average.
The grass is always greener on the other side.
Exactly. And I remember Tentamushi was on some kind of international special. And it turned out it was only interesting because a kid was driving it. That was the only thing about it that was cool. Mega Tento is at least a half reasonable robot.
High praise. I was expecting a lot worse.
The issue I have is this. And it's another sports reference. What's going on today? I have the same issue with Mega Tento that I have with rugby, specifically rugby union. And that is that it hides the action. In rugby union, most of the time is spent with the ball under a pile of players. And Mega Tento only does its damage when you can't see it doing it. And that, to me, defeats the object of this as a spectacle.
They moved their pathetic little drum spinner onto the back of them.
Yes, now that is a very interesting point, because you have to imagine that the weapon being hidden hinders them in the case of a judge's decision.
I think it did hinder them, didn't it? Because didn't they have... Yeah, because in their first fight, they lost to a judge's decision against Poison Arrow, and then they got a wild card back in. And I think it was after that
which,
that
by the way, I
moved
don't
it.
agree with. I don't think they should have got a wild card, but it's a robot with history, so it's always going to get it.
I think it was after that they brought the little drum thing out onto the back of the robot.
That was for the Stinger fight they did that, or was it the Yeti fight? I can't quite remember which.
I thought they brought it out for Stinger and then left it there, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was brought out for
To be fair, the Yeti fight was over quite quickly because Yeti just got to the tiny, stupid wheels and knocked them off, and that was it.
Yeah. They must have moved the drum for Stinger. They must have done.
Yeah, I think it was for that. Also, I'm going to question the idea of this being a drum. This isn't a drum. This is a wide disc, because the diameter of it is greater than its width.
You are so picky.
I think that's a really important difference. The cool thing about a drum is that it gives you a really big sort of hurty area, which isn't the phrase I was reaching for, but it's the phrase I got. You know, that sort of area of danger, that area of attack is really big with a drum. It's kind of at the expense of tip speed, but you can get it up to high RPM, you kind of get that back. This thing is just, it's barely a weapon.
It is better, yeah. Regardless of how you define it, I think we can both agree it's rubbish.
But it's okay, because they have a flappy lid.
Because they have a big lid.
I must say, I would love this design if it were there as a control bot.
Yeah. What?
There's a
How is it
robot...
not there as a control bot?
Well, they're trying to do damage, aren't they?
So you saying that's really like, so if it's a control bot with something that can do damage, it's not a control bot. Is Dead Metal not a control bot?
I mean, as a pure control bot.
You purist, you.
I know. I mean, there's a robot. Well, it's actually now a pair of robots competing in America in the very lightweight in the insect classes called Crave Monster, which I may or may not have sent you a video of before. It's fantastic. It's basically a dustpan and a jaw. It's made out of a cereal box, hence the name. It literally just swallows a robot, drives it to the pit and puts it in. I think that's hilarious. I would watch that all day. If that's what Tentamushi was doing, or Mega Tento, sorry, I keep getting confused. If that's what it were doing, I would be more on board with it.
I think overall I'm sort of quite neutral about it. I was very surprised at how effective its sort of all-encompassing thing was at anything. I'm sort of amazed that it can even hold the robot, because again, it looks like this really big, flimsy, flexible plastic thing that I would expect most robots were to break out of very quickly. But it was surprisingly effective.
I would pay very good money to see Mega Tento versus Nightmare. Just to watch that thing get cleaved in two on the first hit. That would be beautiful.
I think Mega Tento versus any decent spinner.
Well, Yeti's a decent spinner, but it went for the kind of surgical strike on the wheels and left it at that.
Yeah. Mega Tento versus Beta.
Oh, that would be good, actually. The floppiness of the plastic against something like a drum actually works in its favour, because it's almost not rigid enough to get badly broken.
Yeah, it just moves out of the way, doesn't it?
Whereas something like Nightmare, the reason I picked Nightmare particularly, is that it's got that huge upsweep. Which would, it can't get out of the way of that. If it does get out of the way of that, it's just getting lifted up and ripped right off, which would be even better. Any more on Mega Tento, Sam?
No.
That means we get to move into the deep, dark bowels of this series of Battlebots with a couple of the pre-qualifiers. Now, there were 12 robots that went through pre-qualifying, so there were 4 three-way melees. Melees? 4 winners went through, plus one of the losers. We've tried to have a look at the losers. There are some pretty forgettable robots down there, but there were a few that we thought were worth talking about, or specifically, that I thought were worth talking about, as is the case with this first one. Lycan. This was a robot that I was really excited to see, and then completely underwhelmed by. It's kind of both brilliant and terrible.
Why were you even excited to see it?
I'll tell you why I was excited to see it. Dual E-Tech drive.
And why is this exciting?
These are the motors that things like Carbide and Tombstone are using for their weapons.
Okay.
And instead of attaching them to a weapon, they've attached them to a wheel. 35 mile per hour top speed. With the acceleration to match it as well.
Oh my goodness me.
That weapon on the front, that's just there for show. This is a full body hammer.
That's okay. I understand now. Okay.
I was very excited to see this slam into something, and do you know what it did? It missed. It went on one big charge, and it missed. And that was the end of my interest in Lycan.
Such a disappointment.
What is that weapon even trying to do?
I mean, that's why. So the little bit of the fight that I saw, like I didn't quite cotton on to the fact that it was going really fast. So I just sort of saw this weird little jaw thing that's not even close to the ground. It's like, what the hell is that ever going to grab? It seems a bit ridiculous, but yeah, full body hammer makes some sense.
To be fair, the weapon is also a really good excuse to basically put a big shield on the front.
Yeah.
Because there's that nice air gap between that and the innards. So when it comes to coming up against a spinner, it's got a bit of protection. But man, I was so excited to see that just smash into something. And then it turned out to be as uncontrollable as Bucktooth Burl is.
I think that's the danger, isn't it, of having a really sort of fast, high acceleration robot, is that you've got to be a ridiculously good driver to do that well and make use of that speed.
Or just lucky. I would have taken lucky for one hit.
Or very lucky, yeah.
What I want to see is a return of sort of the trials that we used to have in Robot Wars. Just have a Skittles event where it's driving into like 10 barrels.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Lycan would smash it. It would be awesome. So yeah, Lycan, like so many robots before you let me down.
I wonder how fast you could get a robot to go. If you just put everything into speed, I wonder how fast you could make it go.
Well, the issue you've got is the limited size of the box.
Yeah, within the limitations you've got, obviously. I wonder how much faster than 35 you could get. Could you do a 40 or 50 mile an hour robot?
You see, they say 35. I don't know if it could have reached that speed in the box.
No, not within the box. I'm just thinking just abstract things. Or just like if you let's build a robot that falls within the rules for Battlebots, but you give it a mile-long runway. What kind of speeds could you get? I mean, what kind of speeds within the box would be interesting as well?
I mean, in terms of an actual top speed, if you could give it a car-style gearing system, then the limitations kind of start melting away. Because gearing is the main thing that really defines your top speed. It's also the thing that defines your acceleration, to be fair. And of course, for combat, you're trying to find a balance between the two.
I'm curious about how something like the drivetrain on a Tesla works. I have, in the back of my head, the electric motors are just direct attached to the wheels, but they might not be. I wonder if they go through some kind of torque converter or even some kind of, like infinite gear type thing. I'm not sure they do. I think they just spin at the same speed as the wheels do. I'm not sure electric cars use gearboxes, is my conclusion.
To be fair, they may not, in which case the theoretical top speed would be limited by the maximum RPM of the motor and the circumference of your wheels.
Yeah.
So if you put massive wheels on it...
You need so much torque to turn it, man.
Again, that's the issue. So, for example, brushless motors give you fantastic RPM range at the top, but very low startup torque. But if you had some kind of sort of system off of maybe another kind of motor or some secondary gearing to get it moving and then let that motor take over, there's always ways around these things.
Well, a torque converter might help.
No, more motors. Always more motors. That's the correct answer every time. I mean, we're seeing easily 300 mile per hour tip speeds on weapons. Now, I don't know how the maths works out, but if that were a wheel instead, presumably that would equate to 300 miles per hour.
Maybe? I don't know.
Because if you imagine the tip instead being the contact point with the road, that would equate to the same speed, surely.
I think you would struggle to get the robot. I think you'd run into limitations of things like drag before you got to that kind of speed.
I'm talking theoretical. This is a sphere in a vacuum kind of.
Yeah, you've got
into
proper physicist territory here.
I'm specifically avoiding doing the physics properly.
Oh dear! But you've done exactly what all physicists do. Assume it's a point mass in a vacuum.
Basically, I'm taking all the liberties of a physicist with none of the knowledge or rigour.
Oh dear.
No, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't get a sort of 110, 120 kilo electrically powered robot up to the speeds of a car. Surely. The limitations you would start reaching would be stability at speed and the smoothness of the surface you're running on. There's no reason you couldn't get a decent circumference wheel within the weight and find ways to overcome the torque required to get that moving.
You know the giant wheel thing that General Grievous drives in Star Wars?
It's not a bad idea,
like that. Oh, God.
What you've basically described there is just Ringmaster on its side.
Yeah, that'd be so cool.
Well, scrap that amp weight build. I know what I'm making.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna build a General Grievous transportation device.
I can imagine you just riding to work in it.
I'm disappointed that my first Star Wars reference in this podcast is to a prequel.
We could go back and edit something into earlier in the podcast if you'd like.
Oh dear, that is upsetting. Worth it, but upsetting.
Worth it is a very subjective thing. We do, however, have 2 more robots to go through, and they kind of group together. Do you want to intro these 2?
2 more robots, or is it like a million more robots? There's Creepy Crawlies, which is God knows how many robots, and then Gemini, which is also a, in quotes, clusterbot.
Creepy Crawlies is definitely a cluster something, but I think you'd have to beep it if I said it.
It's five robots. At least in the picture, there's 5 of them anyway.
It is indeed 5.
And Gemini. So my first question to you, very quickly, is this Gemini the same Gemini that I know from Robot Wars?
Does it look like the same Gemini that you know from Robot Wars?
Obviously, it's not the same robot, but is it the same team, or they just happen to be using the same name?
No. I feel like if you're making a robot of 2 identical robots and you want a name that represents that, Gemini isn't going to be far from your first point of call, is it?
Yes, obviously Gemini is an obvious choice, but I was just curious to know, is it the same team?
I don't believe so, no.
So these 2 robots both claim to be clusterbots, and I have issues with calling them clusterbots. In my mind, a clusterbot is a robot that comes out as one robot and then splits up after the fact. Putting 6 robots down in a circle around the square that you're meant to start in is not a clusterbot.
It's a cluster of bots.
No, but it's not a clusterbot though, is it?
So the original Robot Wars definition was that they had to start off joined.
Yeah, which is what Gemini did in Robot Wars, like the Robot Wars Gemini, and that was great.
But realistically, what does that add apart from a few hundred grams of weight and a tiny bit of theatre? What are you actually gaining from doing that?
To be honest, it's probably all the theatre. I don't know, I think it's an interesting technical limitation on having multiple robots, that they have to be in some way joined. I mean, you could do mini bots that are, mounted on the back of your robot and then drive off or drop from the bottom of it or something. I think there's many more interesting things you could do if you had to have them work as one robot to begin with.
So you're kind of thinking of the Delta Flyer emerging from Voyager. That's kind of what you're thinking, isn't it? Just drop a tiny thing out and it goes around and be's a nuisance, and that's it.
Yeah. Or like, if you're going to do like something like Creepy Crawlies, have like a robot that's like got 5-way symmetry and then splits along those lines, you know? I just think that would be much cooler.
Thing is, if that were the rule, here's what you'd actually get. You'd get an electromagnet on each side of each of the creepy crawly spots, and they'd come out in a straight line, and they'd immediately split.
Oh no, and that would be lame.
It would. And it would also be the correct solution to the unnecessary problem of splitting. If you want to go away and design a cluster bot that also breaks apart in an interesting way, then that's brilliant. I think I showed you Route 3 from Dutch Robot Wars a while ago, didn't I? The 3-part cluster bot that came out looking like an F1 car.
Oh, no, you've not shown me that one, no.
What?
You've not shown me that.
Okay, how on earth do you even Google this? It's basically the square root sign and 3.
And you think I could type a square root sign on my keyboard?
I think there's more chance of you knowing how than me.
I know how to do it on a Mac, but not on a Windows machine.
Well, that was pointless knowledge.
I'm just saying.
Route 3. Oh, that's Rot 3. German for red.
I've Googled Route 3 robot and I have found a Wikia page.
Is this more your kind of cluster bot?
Yeah, so that comes up looking like one thing, and then it splits. Yeah, look at that. It splits. That is brilliant. That is glorious. That's all that is.
I admire the effort, but it is purely theatre at the end of the day. That is a gimmick. That's what that is.
I think that's cool. I don't think it would ever win anything. Like it fails the competitive robot test, but I think it looks quite cool.
To be fair, I can't really imagine a cluster winning anything anyway, especially the creepy crawly style.
No, I think it's a dream probably inspired by things like Transformers, where you sort of really want it to be effective and all come together into some super powerful robot, but it never quite happens.
That's what I want. I want a cluster bot that comes out as 4 and joins together into 1. That's more interesting.
How is that any more interesting?
Requires more skill. That's a hell of a piece of driving.
Well, that's the kind of thing you would automate, man. You would get them all in like a certain radius of each other, and then press a button, and then they would all figure out where they all are in relation to each other, and just drive themselves.
That's pretty good. And you know what it leads us on to?
What does it lead us on to?
Armchair engineering.
Classic segue.
Is it a segue if it's literally just me saying we're doing the next thing? Let's say yes. So, we want to discuss automation. We've already discussed automation quite a lot with Chomp. We've looked at how Chomp does it. So for me, the question now is, what else can we do with this, and how far can we take it?
I mean, that's the first thing I want to know is what's the limitation? You know, where is it no longer allowed? How automated can you have your robot before the organisers of an event go, no?
I believe the only limitations in the rules on autonomy is that you can override it.
So if you built and somehow figured out the AI for a fully autonomous robot, like a proper John Syracuse robot, and then put it in an arena, that would still be fine.
I can find nothing in the rules that disallows it.
That is fascinating.
I think the limitation would be that not really being within the realm of current technology.
Could you...
Could I? The answer is probably no. Could someone continue?
Could one build... basically build a robot that drives another robot? Could you build like a machine type thing, like a mounting for like cameras and sensors that you put in the booth next to you that then sends the control signals down to the robot so that it's got the same like height advantage that you do, and then even combine that with sensors in the robot? How's that for automation?
If someone out there is capable of doing that, they should be applying it to something far more meaningful than Robot Wars and Battlebots. Can you imagine, though, if Elon Musk just decided, I'm going to win Robot Wars? That's how he'd do it.
It wouldn't surprise me if he did. Given that he tweeted out of boredom that he was going to start tunnelling under Los Angeles and then started tunnelling onto Los Angeles, it wouldn't surprise me if one day he goes, you know what, I'm going to go and win Battlebots now. And then he does it.
I do wonder if you could teach a robot the layout of the arena.
Absolutely.
And if that would then be useful for things like pit avoidance or other hazard avoidance. So, for example, for a spinner, you wouldn't even need to teach it the arena for this. This would just be a proximity thing. Being able to automate wall avoidance might be really useful. Filtering that out from opponent avoidance may be a little more tricky.
Yeah, I would say that's a very, very fine line there.
You know, things like trying to avoid the pit. Obviously, if an opponent is driving you that way, there's nothing the robot can do if it doesn't have the power. But things like, Series 3 kilohertz driving straight into the pit, you can automate that kind of thing out potentially.
Yeah, like auto braking on fancy cars.
Exactly, yeah, that kind of thing. Of course, with these systems, you're looking at latency rather than reaction time.
All your sensors, limitation. All of the sensors on a drone that flies above you.
Oh, God. Back to my serious and useful point.
Sorry, go on.
Latency is the first limitation, but also there's the question of whether once it detects something happening, it can then physically stop it. If you've got momentum in a certain direction, you've got to be able to overcome that momentum. Or if you have a limited turning circle at a certain speed, you can't tighten that turning circle. So there are going to be things that are beyond the automation. The other thing I've been wondering about is what other weapon systems you would potentially want to automate. Because a lot of the dominant weapon types aren't things that need any control. They're things that are purely driving based.
Yeah.
Is Chomp basically already at kind of the peak of what you would want to use this for?
Yeah, there's nothing else that really sort of relies... I mean, you might want autonomous flipping, maybe.
That's the one thing I had down that I thought might be useful.
Because you'd want basically anything that relies on timing is what you'd want to have automated. So yeah, axes or flippers or, things similar to those things.
Automated pincers might be quite fun, or some kind of other grabbing mechanism as well.
Yeah, that seems less useful just because of how slowly those mechanisms tend to move. That you'd want to preempt doing that quite a lot, and I think that would rely a lot more on knowing the intent of the driver, which obviously the robot doesn't.
True, and that is the true limitation of this automation. It can see what is happening, but it does not have the intelligence of foresight.
No.
It can track where a robot will be in X amount of time if it continues at its current course and speed, but it's not going to foresee those course and speed changes.
No, that would be unlikely. This is one of those areas that I think I suspect that a well-designed AI would be surprisingly good at given time. I think it would be very much a machine learning type situation.
Here's a thought. I remember a while ago you sent me a video of sumo robots.
Yeah.
And the speeds they were moving at, they cannot have been human controlled. They must have been autonomous.
I would say that they are high level human controlled, but the specific things that are happening are programmed in, I would guess.
Define the high level control for me.
Well, so if you told it to walk forwards, it's not as if you're pressing all the buttons required to move the motors individually. You just say move forwards and then it will go and do all the crazy movement and balancing that's required to shove it forwards and stuff. And then if you told
I'm thinking of different sumo robots.
Or if you told it to do... Is this the one where they're sort of properly doing wrestling moves and grabbing each other?
No. I'm thinking of... Maybe it's not what you sent me. Maybe I just saw it.
The really, really fast little ones, isn't it? That are driving around. Yeah, I have no idea.
Surely that cannot have been human controlled. The precision with which they were meeting face to face.
Yeah, they must have been some kind of automated controller. Yes, those are the right.
Of course, that is a much more simple setup in terms of combat. You push the thing out of the circle.
Yeah.
And the thing lines up straight in front of you. It's a much more simplistic setup in terms of what you're trying to achieve. But maybe it's more possible than I was first thinking. Because we've had for years things that could, for example, go out and learn a maze and then complete it.
And they can complete it with ridiculous speed.
Mad speed. I mean, even in... And here's something you might want to look at someday. Techno games.
Oh, that was so good.
So bad.
There was that...
So bad with hindsight.
There was the skeleton robot thing that did rope climbing. That was awesome.
Skeletron. What I loved, and this is totally off-piste, but we're going there, things like the high jump robots that were literally just sticks with elastic bands or bottle rockets, and they still made it into Robo games. Robo was really very loosely used at that point.
Pushing the definition of robot.
I also loved all of the Robot Wars robots that just repainted and renamed.
Yeah.
Like Snowstorm and... Oh, what was it they renamed Bigger Brother?
I don't know. My memory for this stuff is not as good as you.
It was like Larger Sibling or something stupid like that. Just a really obvious change. British Bulldog just became Bulldog and things like that. It was brilliant.
Because that had the launch an egg type thing, didn't it, as well, I think?
Yes, which was literally just people who already knew how to build rockets, building their rockets.
Building a rocket and launching an egg.
So bad. So bad.
Fun though, launching rockets. I built a 3-stage rocket.
Of course you did. Of course you did. That's the kind of thing you do.
So I built this 3-stage rocket with a friend of mine, and we took it to a safe place to launch it. So just a little one, basically made out of cardboard and stuff. For those that haven't built rockets before, you can build rockets out of like cardboard. The cardboard tubes that wrapping paper comes in and stuff, and then you can buy model rocket motors, Etsy motors, for example. SD motors, not Etsy.
Etsy is a platform for selling handmade goods.
Yeah, SDs, ESTES. SD's rockets. Anyway, you
like
can buy those.
testes, but not.
You could buy those things, and they're basically the kind of rocket engines that are in fireworks and stuff, but you can get them without the explosive on the end of them, and or with a very small explosive without the fun bit. And then you can stack 3 of them, and you can get one of them. You can get some of these motors that are designed to ignite the next one above it. They send us a very hot charge up when they get to the end of the burn and ignite the next one. So we very ambitiously built a 3-stage rocket, having never built a rocket before, and launched it. And the first stage didn't do very much. The rocket was a bit too heavy, so it sort of lifted it slowly off the launch pad and up the launch guide pole thing we had. And then the second stage fired, and then it wasn't really going fast enough when that sort of transition happened. And then it basically turned 90 degrees, and then shot straight towards us before staging again straight into the floor.
I was kind of hoping it staged again and just accelerated towards you faster.
No, it was terrifying because it properly turned 90 degrees and then came straight towards us at head height. It was ridiculous.
Did it have autonomous targeting?
Unfortunately. We did also build a 2-stage rocket, like a backup rocket that was slightly less ambitious, and that worked brilliantly. That went straight up. That was glorious.
That's the aim for a rocket, straight up. That's how you go to space.
Oh, yeah. These are not rockets that go into space. They go like a few hundred feet into the air, or maybe, they don't go very high.
To space. Nothing less.
The size of rocket that you need to get into space, like be technically in space, is shockingly small.
Oh yeah, but getting into orbit...
Yeah, orbit is ridiculous
different.
because of the speed required. But
because orbit isn't just straight up. Orbit needs some sidey side as well.
I know how orbital mechanics work. I have hundreds of hours sunk into Kerbal Space Program. I know how this stuff works.
I also have hundreds of hours sunk into Kerbal Space Program. Unfortunately, due to the speed of my laptop, I imagine I achieved significantly less in that time.
I had like space stations around Kerbin and then the moon, and then I managed to get... I think I got landers as far as the Mars equivalent. Is it Duna? But before... Well, because like all the time acceleration and stuff, it was really... I had a lot of fun building stuff in space. I really enjoyed building space stations.
I hate docking. I still do. I learned to do it, but I did so grudgingly.
I had like a very, very modular launch system as well. So I had a system where it's like you have a payload and then you can just... Because you can... I think by the end of when I was still playing it, you had the sub-assemblies option, so you could build...
Oh, yes.
So I built
just
several...
chuck a lander on top of a launch stage.
Well, no, so I built several launch stages that were rated for different like lift capacities, right? Similar to how real rockets work, right? So there was I had a lightweight lifter, a medium, and a heavy lifter. And I think I even got as far as a super heavy lift rocket. And then I could just design whatever ridiculous payload I wanted, and then just break it up into small parts and launch it on several rockets just for the joy of docking them in space.
Here's the $1 million question for any KSP fan.
Yeah.
Asparagus staging, yes or no?
I think as far as optimizing for video games, yes. But if you want to try and emulate real life, obviously you don't do it. I think I asparagus staged some stuff, but I also tried to do stuff similar to how the real world does. So my favourite rocket is a Soyuz rocket. I just love the way that looks and the way it stages. So I often have the that kind of outer stage, inner stage type thing. Obviously, the Soyuz doesn't do the asparagus thing where it's got fuel draining from the 2 on the outside to 2 more on the outside and then onto the inside. None of that exists.
Because that would create masses of unwanted rotation.
Yeah, so there's nothing in there, nothing on the Soyuz that does that kind of stuff. But so I didn't do it very often in Kerbal Space Program. But it is useful to try and to get a bunch more lift capacity. I had to stop. I didn't have to. I stopped playing that game when they changed the aerodynamics and the physics behind that, because obviously for people that played for a long time. So I played. I'm going to be a real hipster for you now. I played from like one of the really early alphas before they had liquid rockets. It was all solid rocket motors, and that was it. Or maybe they had just like one liquid motor or something, just like the the non-swivel one, the something 45.
Do you mean non-thrust vectoring?
Yeah, the non-swivelly one.
Use the correct terms. Come on,
but
we can do
it's
this.
the other one, the swivelly one, has the word swivel in its name. LV45 swivel or something silly like that. Anyway, the non-thrust vectory one is what they had. Anyway, that's how long I was playing it for. But through all that time, you could get to orbit by just going straight up to about 10 kilometers and then just turning to 45 degrees and carrying on. because the physics for the atmosphere were really bad. So that's what you could do. And then that's a really bad habit to be in. Obviously, that's not how you do it in real life. So when they changed the atmosphere physics to be more realistic, I could no longer get to orbit. I would do this. I would go straight up for 10 kilometers and then I would turn and then my rocket would go into a death spin, and that was it. And I stopped playing.
Couldn't handle the failure.
Well, to this day, I don't think I've managed to successfully do orbit in a modern version of that game.
Oh, wow.
Well, they changed too much. It's got all the crazy career mode stuff in it as well. I like Sandbox.
Sandbox is always an option still.
I know. But it's that, the atmosphere physics, man. It killed something for me.
I think it's fair to say we have tangented into oblivion here. Sam, how can people get hold of us? It's back.
Back again. Shady's back. You can find...
Tell a friend.
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episodes/9. And you can find links to all the stuff we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter page where you can tweet us what you had for dinner. And you can also find a link to our iTunes page, and we'd really appreciate a rating. Bye!